You're listening to the Just Japan podcast. Everything you want to know about Japan.
Hey there, folks, and welcome to episode number 181 of the Just Japan podcast, everything you want to know about Japan. My name is Kevin O'Shea, and I'm the host of this weekly podcast that's all about Japan, stuff about Japan, food, people, culture, language, raising a family, lots of cool stuff. And this week I've got returning guest Brian Waters, and he comes on the podcast to basically talk a lot about raising a family in Japan. Now, Brian has been on the podcast in the past. He was on one of the first episodes, episode number 11, back in early 2014, talking about his job teaching forensic pathology in Japan. And he also was featured in a few different episodes talking about building a house in Japan. And again, this week he's back to talk about raising a family in Japan, having a kid go through the Japanese public school system and all that. It's a really interesting discussion. I think you guys are going to really enjoy it. Well, folks, in following the news and all the Twitter feeds of awesome people who are living in Japan at the moment, it looks like Hanami season is upon all of you in the Kanto region and other parts of Japan. That's right, time to enjoy the cherry blossoms, the sakura, to have Hanami parties, picnics. I'm really envious. I'm sitting here in my apartment right now in Beijing, China, and we're not quite there yet. I have found some spots with some cherry trees around here, but they're not going to be blossoming for another week or two. But hey, trust us, be assured, rest assured, my family and I will have our own little Hanami party right here in China. Because, that's just one of the best parts of spring, isn't it? Yeah, folks, so, of course, if you're new to this podcast, you can find us all over the place. The home of the Just Japan podcast is over at justjapanstuff.com. Go over there and check it on out. Lots of great blog posts, a lot of great content. All of the back episodes are there. And when you click on any post, or show notes link, I should say, for an episode of the Just Japan podcast, you'll see all the different options, the way you can listen to the podcast. Because I know that iTunes or Apple Podcasts only carries the most recent 99 episodes. This, of course, is 181. But if you click on the Libsyn link, you can listen to all 181 episodes at your pleasure. They're all there. And you can even just download the files directly onto your device or your computer, whatever it may be. So again, go to justjapanstuff.com. That's the home of this podcast. And another little exciting thing I'm going to announce, started a new project. So for all of you out there who are teachers, whether you're a public school teacher in Canada or America, Australia, or if you're an English teacher somewhere in the world, go to makingbetterteachers.com. That's my new site, makingbetterteachers.com. It's a new project. I'm a professional teacher. It's about teaching. I didn't want to cross-pollinate. I want to keep very separate from Just Japan stuff, of course. You guys are here to listen to Japan content. Respect that. That's awesome. Thank you for stopping by. But for those of you out there who might be interested in some education content, there's another option. And there will be a new upcoming podcast series, not in this feed, and its own separate feed, called the Making Better Teachers podcast. So makingbetterteachers.com for the blogs, lots of cool education stuff there. And coming soon to Apple Podcasts near you, the Making Better Teachers podcast. So go check that out, guys. And without further ado, let's hop into the interview.
Please hang up and try again.
Okay, so Brian, for those out there who, may not have listened to episode number 11, they may not have listened to other episodes where you talk about building a house in Japan and other things, could you tell the listeners out there a little bit about yourself, where you're from and what you do in Japan?
Sure thing. I'm originally from North Carolina in the United States, and I got interested in Japan because I'm half Japanese, and when I was in college, I did a study abroad in Nagoya. And I loved it so much that after I graduated, went to the JET program. And then after returning to the U.S. to do grad school, I missed Japan so much I wanted to come back. So 7 years ago, with my Japanese wife and 2 kids in tow, we returned to Japan. And I'm currently an assistant professor in the forensic medicine department of Fukuoka University. And we like you mentioned, we built a house 3 years ago, I think now, and yeah, enjoying life, and that's it.
Nice, nice. So, folks, so what your appetite there? If you heard Brian say that he works in forensic medicine, so you should go back to episode 11. There will be a link in the show notes. That one's not on SoundCloud or anything, but you can listen to it in the Libsyn player. It's right there, and you can download it from Libsyn. But go to listen to episode number 11 to find out exactly what he does. But again, 4 years ago that was, and when I interviewed you 4 years ago for the first time, I guess we do the math. You mentioned you came to Japan 7 years ago, so you were only in Japan for a few years at the time with your family. Your children were much younger than they are now. So
That's right.
when you first came to Japan, how old were your kids?
So I have a son and daughter. My son was 5, and my daughter was 3.
Okay.
And so if you can add, then you'll know my.
No, I can't
my
do that. I'm beyond
son
that.
is-
That math is beyond me. I'm a very poor elementary school
My son
teacher.
is now. My son is 12. He'll be 13 in July, and my daughter just turned 10.
Wow. Okay. So folks, I have to admit, the trigger for me wanting to contact Brian for this episode was literally seeing a picture you posted on, it was either Facebook or on Twitter, of your son graduating from elementary school. And I went, what? But his son's just a little kid. And then I realized, oh, wow, wait a second. I interviewed in 2014 the first time, I think, when you talked about your family. So, as it goes, right? Time marches on. And when you got the little ones, it moves on quickly.
That's right.
Yeah, but I was like, oh, wow. Huh. I suppose a lot of the people...
Yeah, it is.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a blink of an eye. It's a blink of an eye, seriously.
Isn't it, right? So all the parents out there know, and not even parents. I think we all kind of just realize, even if, we don't have kids and stuff, one day we're like partying here, and the next day we're like, hey, wait a second, what's this white hair doing poking out of my head?
That's true, but the thing about kids is they change so much so fast that it makes it even more apparent. Like
yeah,
if you're,
true.
I'm sure it happens when you're single. You blink an eye and you got gray hair, or it's falling out like mine is. But yeah, if you have kids, like I mean, like just the other day, like, yes, my son graduated from elementary school, and then just looked on my iPhone, and still some of the pictures I have just on my iPhone, he's just a baby. I mean, he's not a baby, but he's just like so much younger. It's just like, I can't believe it's the same person,
Well, I literally have my son's like 7 turning 8 this year, but I mean, I have baby photos on my phone, and you're like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
really? Oh my gosh, how did that happen? But because it's called age, and that does happen. But I think again, the last time we talked, your kids are a lot younger, and now, I mean, you were coming from the States. Your children were born there, and I guess your son had, I assume, gone to kindergarten or part of kindergarten, junior kindergarten or something in the States before moving to Japan.
That's right. He had gone through about 6 months of kindergarten, or wait, let me think. No, he had almost completed a full year of kindergarten before we came. So
Okay.
No, I'm sorry. He was halfway in because we moved in March. So yeah, the school difference means that he still had a little bit left.
He would have finished probably in June of that year if he would have stayed in America.
Yes. Exactly.
Yeah. So you moved to Japan when your son was in kindergarten and your daughter was, not in school yet, I assume. And your kids entered the Japanese school system. I'm curious. I mean, as someone, you're American. Like you mentioned in the intro, you're half Japanese, but you grew up in America, right? You went through the whole school system in America.
Yes.
No, obviously you weren't a parent of a child going through the school system in America, but I guess you went through it as a young one, and you have that American perspective. So what how would you explain or describe, as a very sweeping, broad, general thing I'm going to throw at you right now, but like the kind of the elementary school experience you had as a parent of a kid who went through it in Japan?
Okay.
I mean,
I
okay.
think.
So like, okay, let's set up a little bit of context. I mean, okay, I'm a Canuck, I'm a Canadian, and I can remember like how like when um, my kids were both born in Japan, right? And I remember my
Hmm.
son went to Japanese private kindergarten, and he graduated, and it was for me there was like the kind of culture shock of what a big deal it was to go from kindergarten to elementary school. It was a huge thing, and there's a lot of kind of rites of passage that in Japanese education, kind of in the that we just didn't have back home.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? I'm just curious, like what were some of the kind of again, it's a big one, but I mean, kind of impressions. Were you happy with the experiences your son had in general? Do you think he had a lot of people bitch and gripe about, pardon the French, about education in Japan, but as far as like the elementary school system went, did your seem like your son had a good time?
Yeah. So, all right. So, just to give you a little bit of background, so I'm not speaking completely out of my ass. Um, I, I was born and raised in North Carolina, and so I went through public school in North Carolina and everything like that. My mother, who's Japanese, was actually a first grade teacher's aide in North Carolina. So
Okay.
I kind of was very familiar with public school system in Wake County, North Carolina. But um, when my son was born, we were living in California, Los Angeles area,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
so he was going through the public school system, Los Angeles County School District, and so it was a little different. But of course I don't remember when I was a kid growing up how the elementary school system was
You
in
just
in
had
my
you had teachers and you had to do stuff, right?
yeah, but I can say for sure that I didn't really see any kind of clear like like celebration between going from preschool to kindergarten to first grade because where I grew up, you were maybe 4 or 5, maybe 3 when you entered into some kind of preschool or daycare,
Yeah.
but kindergarten started at 5 or 6, and for my school, kindergarten was part of the elementary school, so it was K through 5, right?
Yeah.
Was the way it was. So there was no like graduation from kindergarten into first grade. I don't even think there was very much of a ceremony from preschool into kindergarten, really. So just like you said, when your kids graduated from Yochien,
Yep.
that was like a big thing, and for our kids as well, because when when my son was came here, he was 5. My daughter was 3, and since Japan is about 6 months behind of the American school system, Seiji had to go back into the kindergarten system for a while.
Yeah.
Well, actually, for a whole year.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So
That
he
makes
had,
sense.
yeah, yeah. So he had to redo basically his whole year of kindergarten,
His year
which
three,
in
his year three of kindergarten, because a lot of places,
his yes,
a lot of places
that's
have
right,
the
his
3 year
year 3.
kindergarten, right? Yeah.
That's true. That's right. So ours was a private kindergarten as well, and they had uh, Ichinensei, Ninensei, Sanensei, so
Hmm.
1, 2, and third years. So my daughter slid right into first year kindergarten. My son was had to redo his third year kindergarten here in Japan, and it was fine. Like they slid right in. If there was any kind of language difficulty, I didn't notice it. And I mean, they did go to. We lived in Los Angeles, so they did go to a Japanese daycare to keep their language up. So
Oh,
that was
okay.
good for them. Yeah.
Hmm.
But yeah, other than that, man, they just slid right in, made friends. There was no, I mean, I didn't see any kind of like effects from it at all.
Just
And
a
then yeah,
very
there
smooth transition.
very smooth transition. Yeah, absolutely. And then right into like there is kind of a celebration, a graduation ceremony at the end of Yochien,
Yeah.
and then it flows right into a entry ceremony into the first grade, which is um, kind of, it's all about the ceremonies here.
Yeah.
And it's amazing because they have them down, man. They've got them set from way back in the day. They just like it works like clockwork. It's everyone knows what to do. So I'm sure we're gonna get to that in a second.
Yeah.
But,
Whether you're a teacher, an administrator, or a parent, or a child, just everyone seems to know what to do, right? So,
yeah.
I went through the process too. My son graduated from Yochian, which for you guys, if they're kindergarten, he went into Ichinensei, which is like, it's a huge deal. Like, you've heard the term Pika Pika Ichinensei, right? You want to be that shiny, sparkly grade 1 student. It's a really special time. So like, going into the transition into grade 1, there's certain kind of ceremonies, not just the opening ceremony and the closing ceremony, but like, for example, how do things work in your family with the randosel, the backpacks?
Yeah, I mean,
That's a
so
big
of
deal,
course
right? That's a huge deal.
it's a it's a huge deal. For those of you who don't know, Landocell are basically, I think, what is the etymology of the word Landocell? I think it's like a European word, right?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't really know. I mean,
Yeah, I think it is.
it's a handmade leather backpack, school bag.
Yeah,
That's essentially
yeah, and it's rigid. It's rigid.
very rigid,
and
very
like
strong. It's meant to last for
yeah.
6 years of elementary school.
Right. So when our kids are ichinense, when they're first year students, the thing is huge and it's swallowing them whole. And
Yes.
by the time they're in the 6th grade, it's just like it's
It
tiny on their back.
It looks like a toy that can't hold anything aside from a toothbrush.
Yeah. Exactly. But and I think I mentioned this on a podcast that I was on with you maybe, but the Landacell is rigid like that on purpose because it serves a purpose if the kids are to fall backwards. It kind of acts as a barrier between them and the ground, so their head doesn't slam onto the ground.
But part of which I guess I suppose it works, but part of the reason why they're probably falling backwards is because they have a giant, huge backpack on their back.
That's true. That's true. I didn't think of that.
Right? Yeah. So, when your son went into elementary school, and I have to admit, my son was only in elementary school for 1 semester before we pulled the trigger and we left Japan. We moved to Beijing, where we're at now. So now I'm teaching at the Canadian International School here in Beijing, and my son and my daughter are both students at the Canadian International School. My son actually still he wears his randosel to work every day, or to school. Not so much work now. But ironically enough, in China, it's become very fashionable for really wealthy Chinese parents to buy Japanese randosel for their kids.
Really?
So many of the really like upscale Chinese students at the school. I mean, I've got a lot of students from a lot of countries. I've got, I think, 11 nationalities represented in my classroom. But for a lot of the kind of upscale Chinese students, they're carrying a randosel that their parents bought during trips to Japan. It's very interesting.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like, I mean, I didn't know that. That's crazy. But these Landocell, they're incredibly expensive. Like even the cheapest of the cheap Landocell in Japan, if you buy them new, are like 150, 200 US dollars. So like Niman yen.
Yeah.
Starting from that, and the better ones, and these are the ones that kind of like probably are sold the most. Are up in the range of like 6, 7, 8 man.
Yeah.
Just for a backpack. I mean, it's going to last them 6 years, but still, I mean, geez. And so, yeah. So
yeah, exactly. Geez.
We were like, I was talking with my wife, and we were like, we don't really need to buy them like a crazy expensive one. But just as we were saying that, the loving grandparents scooped in and bought the expensive ones for both of my kids. So we didn't have to deal with that cost. So sometimes it happens. It was nice.
That's how it tends to be. The loving grandparents tend to have that role. Actually, our loving grandparents, my son's loving grandparents bought his for him too. Yeah,
That's the
yeah.
way it works usually.
And
And of course, they can't skimp because this is part of their pride.
yeah,
It's like this is an important gift from them, so
yeah,
they go
yeah,
all out.
yeah. Yeah, yeah. So I mean, okay, you move on in this, in the years in school, and I'm really curious. One thing that I didn't have, and maybe this, I think this, from what I hear, is a blessing. I did not have the opportunity to get involved in the PTO of my local school, but I know that my wife, when she was like, dealing with my son's kindergarten, she had to, air quotes, volunteer to do a lot of things with the kindergarten PTO. Did you and your wife have any interesting experiences with the elementary school parent teacher organization?
Yeah, well, of course, there's a lot of pressure on Japanese mothers to participate and to donate their time, and it's not fair that it's not really the pressure isn't the same on the dads, but
Mm,
that's just kind of the way it is. But yeah, I was kind of able to escape that because my job demands a lot of my time. But and part of what my wife was able to do for a while was because we had two kids,
okay.
and and the younger one, you know, for a while was at home and needed to be taken care of. She was able to kind of skirt those responsibilities.
Gotcha.
But now, like, son is 12, graduating, going on to junior high, and daughter is in fifth grade, going to be in fifth grade this year. So
Mm.
my wife has been she's been targeted
Oh no.
by the yeah. So they're like, you don't have any excuse anymore. So even though she works too, so it's tough.
She's
But
in the crosshairs.
she's had to kind of accept the role, and now she, like, I don't know, twice a month she has to go to these meetings like late on a Friday night and stuff, and she's she has to do stuff on the computer, and it's serious business. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of kind of pressure, and if you say, no, I'm sorry, I can't, or if you refuse too much, then all the mothers will get together and talk behind your back and stuff, and that's not good for anyone. So you kind of have to do it. But
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Those pressures of being a mom in Japan, right? So,
yeah, it is tough.
it is tough, eh? Right? There's a lot of pressures that they have that the working dads don't even probably comprehend, right?
Yeah, I mean, the only reason that I know about it is because is my wife complains about it, and I'm sure there's lots of
Oh
mothers
yeah.
out there that keeps it to themselves.
Well, I knew a lot about it because my wife complained to me about it in the elementary or the kindergarten side of it. Yeah, yeah. And then other mothers would complain to her, and then she'd share it with me. But it's a lot of pressure. Okay, so all that aside, guys, not trying to make it sound like it's just all a big poo party here. This is great aspects to elementary school life in Japan. But it's really interesting coming from that kind of parental aspect of it, like the things when you're coming from the outside, like Brian and I are. I'm not at the moment, but I may be back in Japan in the next few years. Kind of the plan. It is a very different experience. So now, like your son is entering junior high school, and one thing I'm very curious about is there is and I'm not sure what you guys are doing with regards to extracurricular education or sports or this or that, but juku life is a big part of things in Japan. And for those of you who may not know, juku are basically after school education programs. Some people say cram schools. I'm curious. Have your kids been going to Juku? Has that been a part of their kind of education program or kind of the vision that you guys have for them, or not?
Yeah, neither of my kids go to JUCO. They haven't gone to JUCO. My Both of them are really big into swimming,
Okay.
and so they're both on the local swim team, and that demands a lot of their time. Like, my son has practice 2 hours a day,
Oh wow.
and then yeah,
So
and
they're
I think
competitive swimmers.
competitive
Oh, okay.
swimmers. Yeah,
Yeah,
so
nice.
probably I don't know, maybe um, I'd say a dozen or so weekends out of the year we're off to meets and time trials and stuff like that. So
Oh, okay.
that takes a lot of time, and I don't think it would be insane. And some kids do this, but it would be insane if he were both in juku and swimming on the swim team, because I mean he would have no time, and I wouldn't see him like any. And it's incredible that some kids, do more than one sport and juku and stuff
But
like
but
that.
there's
But
actually more than some.
yeah,
There's a lot of kids who live that life,
there's a
right?
lot. Yeah, it's crazy. And but my kids, luckily, their grades are pretty good. Like their their marks are always fine. And then we also have them doing kind of this extracurricular study workbook series that we get like every month. And so, as far as I can tell, and of course it's different for me because I can't review their homework and stuff the same way that their mother can, but I can look at their math, and I can look at their science and stuff like that, and I can tell that they're, and just look at their marks, and tell that they're doing okay. And just through talking to them and stuff, like, what did you do at school today and all that kind of stuff, I can tell that they're not having problems in that regard. So, but the big thing about JUCO, and the big reason for it, is, of course, preparation for these big exams. And
Yeah.
some kids, when they're about to graduate from elementary school, they will take exams to get into private or prestigious middle schools. And so that was never our plan anyway. So
Okay.
yeah, so we would always plan that he would just go to the local middle school, and then eventually, I think it's inevitable he'll have to start doing test preparation for high school exams, like maybe in a year or so, or 2 years. I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, so that's kind of always been our informal plan, and we'll probably stick to that unless something happens and he starts to fall behind in his studies or something like that. Yeah.
I suppose like in my experience in Japan, in the years I taught in Japan, when I initially began teaching, I was working at an international kindergarten, and by international I mean that the teachers weren't Japanese. The student body were all Japanese, and
Hmm.
a lot of the parents, were really hoping to get their kids into the what they call the escalator schools.
Hmm.
You're familiar with that term, escalator schools. So,
Well,
so like
I'm not really.
okay, you get them into, like, for example, um, I'll think of an example of one in the Kobe Kansai area called Konan. Konan. There was a Konan University. So there was like the Konan. If you could get the kid into, if you got your child into Konan Yochien, they had a much better chance of getting to Konan Shogako. And if they got into that Shogako, then they were basically going to move right up into the junior high school, and they would move up into the high school, and then without anything, they're in university. So these universities that have the whole school series moving up,
Yeah.
I've heard they call them escalator schools. So like once you initially get in, you're set for life.
Yeah, and I hadn't heard that term, but yeah, they do have them here in Fukuoka as
Like
well.
your kids don't have to worry about going through the whole testing thing. So you do it early, right? So you get them like when they're like 4 years old, 5 years old, and the Juken Taiso courses where they're like doing all the Juku stuff when they're like little kids, and parents will put them in there where they're going like 3, 4, 5 days a week. After Yochian, they're going to these like extra Juku courses just to get into a prestigious elementary school or whatever it may be. They kind of put the pressure on them early, and then
Yeah.
they can kind of slide through the rest of the way. So I've had the pressure of having like parents like freaking out about that, or even I've taught kids who, like, for example, went to public elementary school and they would come to my school maybe for summer camp or this or that. But then in grade 4, they stopped everything to do with English, and they dropped every sports program because they had to go to juku because their parents wanted them to get ready for private junior high school. So for grade 4, 5, 6, those 3 years would be dedicated to juku, kind of thing.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy.
It is really crazy. The reason why I'm explaining this so vividly is I remember like having students having like I really wish I could study English with you more, but I have to get ready for junior high school. I'm like, but you're in grade 4.
Yeah, yeah, it is.
That's just me culturally not getting it, not understanding the system at the time. But
Yeah, and it's totally system driven. I mean, these parents, you can, I mean, I think it's probably easy to try and kind of point a finger at them and saying, why are you putting so much pressure on your kids? But it definitely is the system. I mean, and the fact of the matter is, if you get into a good college, you can, and if you get into a good college, you don't really have to study all that hard in order to graduate from that college, and
Yeah.
then if you have that degree from a halfway decent college, you can kind of just easily flow into the workforce in this country. It's kind of almost not the opposite, but it's just
Yeah. Well,
in
it is kind of counter to kind of what you and I experienced. I mean, I think
yeah.
we're similar ages, and I think like what kind of we experienced, and when you talk to a lot of people from Japan or for Korea, for example, or even people I've met here in China who are in the know, like they know that like getting into university might not always be very difficult in Canada or America. Getting to a top school, different issue. But I mean, the percentage of people who complete a university degree, like the kind of university back home is more the test of your mettle. Getting through that university program. A lot of people get in, not a lot of people get out. Not a lot of people
Yeah.
leave with the degrees. Whereas in like, for example, Korea or Japan, it's really hard to get into that great university or even a decent university. But once you get in, you're pretty much guaranteed you're going to get out with that degree.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Like I'm amazed at it because I went to a state university. I went to North Carolina State University, which has a large student body. I think when I was there, it was like 35,000 undergrads,
Okay.
and the standards for getting into the school weren't as demanding as, say, some of the more top schools in North Carolina, like Duke or North Carolina. But still, even so, even though you got in, it was easier road to get into NC State. People dropped out like flies. Like it was like the next thing you turn your head, and 3 or 4 of the guys that were staying on your dorm room floor were out.
Oh
Because
yeah,
they just couldn't. Yeah,
they couldn't hack it academically.
Yeah.
It was like that in Eastern Canada. I went to a small university for my undergrad, and Cape Breton University, and I can remember like my first year, I was in a very small program called speech communication, and when I started, we probably had like, I don't know, 50 or 60 people in my program. When I graduated, there was like maybe less than 20 of us. Like,
yeah,
just those people just didn't make the cut. They just
yeah,
dropped
yeah.
out and left, and they're like, "This is too hard," or
Switched majors.
switch
Or did everything
majors.
they could. Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah. Decided to drop down and go to what maybe in the States you call junior college. We call it community college. Just
yeah.
very different atmosphere. Yeah, yeah. So as we stray, because we're talking. Well, in the future, your kids' university, blah blah blah.
That's right.
I'm really curious. Um, you know, I'm going to assume you're raising your children to be bilingual.
Yeah, you can assume that.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
How's that
Yeah,
going? How's that going?
No, yeah, no, they're not going well. I mean, it's so hard, man. First of all, my Japanese is pretty good, so
Yeah, I know.
and
Which
and
makes
they
makes it more tricky.
right, and they know that I can speak Japanese and understand it to a certain degree.
Yeah.
So pressure on them
Good
to
enough.
speak
Good
English
enough
to communicate with
Good
me.
enough to teach at a university.
well, I don't know. anyway, their pressure to speak to me in English in order to communicate with me, there's no real pressure because they already understand that I speak Japanese to a certain level. So if without any kind of external pressure and without me just basically demanding that they speak English to me at all times or speak English in the house or whatever, yeah, they're just going to flow through the path of least resistance, and
Yeah.
that is just using Japanese. So that's what's happened. And
I love
I'm
the way you put that. By the way, they're gonna flow through the path of least resistance.
yeah.
That's so
And
diplomatic.
I'm embarrassed about it actually. I'm embarrassed about it like my wife is embarrassed about it. I mean, there are kids at our kids' school with two Japanese parents who maybe go to like Eikaiwa or something who speak Japanese better than my kids, and
Or
it's just embarrassing.
speak English. You mean better than your kids?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, speak English better than my kids, and you know what? I just it's hard. It's like if I told my wife, I said, if I could, if I got a less demanding job, I could focus more on teaching them English. But it was like
Yeah.
it's kind of a trade off. But you know what? I think somewhere buried in their brains from the time that they lived in the United States and just the general, like I speak to them in English whenever I can, until they can't understand it or unless I have to make a very important point, and then I switch over into Japanese. But I think the vocabulary and the pronunciation is somewhere deep in their brain somewhere, and then when they realize that they really need it, which they're going to realize pretty soon, especially my son starting junior high, I think it's going to come out, and I think there's a switch that's going to be flipped, and they're going to be able to kind of access the information. Anyway, that's what I'm hoping for and praying for.
Do you ever like plan on, like, for example, I mean, if you have family back in the States, shipping them back to the States for a holiday or a prolonged vacation, or maybe even a year abroad? Spend a year in a school back home.
Absolutely, I would love to do that. And actually, like the only thing that's really been preventing us from doing that is, well, they're pretty substantial, but it's money and it's their ages. So now that Seiji's 12, it's not long before. I mean, he could probably fly to America by himself
Hmm.
now. I mean, the airlines are pretty good with taking care of kids that are on their own. Like I've
Yeah.
seen it, while I was been flying as well. So and so it may be that one of those things where we just pick like a month or a few weeks, and I just call my sister who lives in North Carolina and be like, hey, can you take Seiji for a couple of weeks, and I'll give you money or whatever, and I'm sure they'd be like, yeah, send him on, and I think a few of those, like, like maybe in his developing stages
Oh,
here,
it could be
well,
very,
he's,
very crucial. Very, those could make a real big impact, right?
yeah, absolutely. And I don't think it would take long before, he would be back to having at least a very basic ability to communicate in English effectively. I mean, it would probably just take a few weeks, I would think. Yeah.
Yeah, I think.
At least that.
No, I think you would be very surprised in a pleasant way of what the kids can do, right? Like, I mean, I think when we made our big move from Japan to China, last year, my family, we made the move, for my job, and interestingly enough, my kids went from both being my son being in Japanese shogako, my daughter being in yochien, and they both went to international school. My son has enough of a base to hold on to the Japanese, and then he had a classmate who was Japanese who had just moved to Beijing who had zero English. So my son was
Hmm.
like the bridge who helped the teacher, who helped everyone because this boy couldn't communicate. So my son was like the translator and his friend and stuff. But my
That's
daughter,
cool.
my daughter got thrown into a class where it was all Chinese kids. So my daughter
Mm,
only spoke Japanese and a little bit of English, and she had a lot of stress until there was
mm.
a little girl who got dropped into a class from Singapore who didn't speak Chinese and spoke English, and then there was this connection, and then we saw my daughter's English went bing, and actually she started forgetting all of her Japanese.
Yeah,
And
that's
so now it's like a struggle. So like we're here in Beijing, kids go to Canadian International School. My son now spends every Saturday going to a Japanese school, not all Saturday, but like the morning, to
hmm
maintain because he's learning. He has to, we want him to know how to read and write Japanese. And then my daughter now,
yeah.
there's a Kumon, about a 5 minute walk from here. So my daughter is now taking Japanese classes at Kumon here in Beijing.
Yeah, that's the way to do it. Is to kind of put them in a kind of a structured situation. Because if you try to do it yourself, and we found this to
Yep.
be the problem, like initially before we came back, we were like, we'll have to keep their English up, like let's only speak English in the house and stuff. And the first one to abandon that is my wife, because she's just like she has to get things done right. So it's just like she has to order them around, and Japanese just faster and everything, right? And then when I get home from work, I'm tired, and as much as I want to give them my full attention and maybe ask them how their day was in English, it's just faster and more efficient if I I might ask them, how was your day in English, but they'll respond in Japanese, and since I can understand it, it's almost too much trouble to go, okay, now say that in English and try to
Yeah, I gotcha, I
get
gotcha.
them through it.
Yeah. So I mean, that's easier maybe to do when your kids are young, but in our example, like in our situation, where our kids are only 7 and 4, it makes more sense. Like it's just easier. Like for example, like literally, my school is across the street from the Japanese embassy. Like there's a massive Japanese community right around where I live. So
Hmm.
they have a kumon for Japanese kids. And
Yeah.
we're just like, you know what? My daughter, she's hearing, she's listening to Japanese from my wife. She talks to her brother in Japanese. She needs more. She needs to talk to teachers in Japanese and hear other kids speaking Japanese. And, although many may say, Kumon's, drill based and this and that. Yeah. But whatever, it has this place in our situation. That's like a little zone for twice a week for 40 minutes. My daughter hears a whole bunch of people speaking Japanese and she interacts with them in Japanese. And she can build her vocabulary and speak. So it's a good thing. But
Yeah, I mean, any port in the storm, like it's literally like any way they can get it, and I've tried that so many times with my kids, just like they'll want to watch a movie or something that just came out on the American iTunes,
yeah.
and I'll be like, okay, but I'm getting it in English, right? Like, I'm not going to get it in Japanese. Well, first of all, they don't even offer it in Japanese. But if the same movie was on the Japanese iTunes store, I'll just get it in English, and you have to watch it in English. So any port in a storm, and that when and
Yeah.
they're forced to watch it and
Yeah.
try to understand it, But
Exactly. You take what you can get, right?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So the adventures, I mean, at the end of the day, these are the adventures of international families, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And
But they're good adventures.
they're good adventures, and every
Yeah,
situation is so different.
that's
Every
true.
situation is so different. I can remember in the early years of me blogging when I was in Japan, I'd say, this is what I do with my family. And then like there'd be a bunch of like huffy dads who are like bloggers who'd be like, oh yeah, that's right, I do it this way, I do it this way. I'm like, well, but like every family's different, man. Like, like
Yeah, that's so true.
in our situations, like, you have a certain level of Japanese proficiency that I don't have. So therefore the kids are like, Dad, you don't speak any Japanese. And then when I go somewhere and I do speak a bit of Japanese, they're like, how did you do that? How do you know that? How do you know that word, Dad? I'm like, well, I know some guys. I'm not fluent, but I lived in Japan for a long time. I'm not an idiot.
Yeah, my kids are like that whenever I can read a kanji. They're just like, "Oh, you can read that?" I'm just like, "All right, come on now.
Oh,
Give me some
come
credit.
on,
I've
guys.
lived here for..."
I haven't had a lobotomy. Daddy, you can read Yama? Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Cool, man. Well, I mean, okay, for you guys out there listening, folks out there listening, this was I enjoyed this talk. This is a nice talk about the experiences. You know, you're someone from Canada, you're America, you come to Japan, you live here long term. Well, I'm not here at the moment. I'm not in Japan. I'm in Beijing. But my wife's Japanese. I lived there for 10 years, and we were hoping to be back in the future. Um, life can get interesting, especially with the language, the education. It's a neat experience. It can be frustrating. It's rewarding, but I suppose it's like that no matter where you live, right? As a parent.
Yeah, that's true. And we're really looking forward to this next stage because Seiji enters middle school and or junior high. It's weird, like I don't know where you grew up, but in my hometown there was an elementary school. There were a bunch of elementary schools that went to fifth grade,
Okay.
and then we had a middle school that was just sixth and seventh, and then just one junior high that was eighth and ninth, and then our senior high school was 10th, 11th, 12th.
That's nothing like I grew up with.
Yeah, isn't that weird? Like, I mean, there's a lot of ways to do it, but
We
what?
had elementary that went from kindergarten to six,
Mhm,
and then you go to junior high, which was 7, 8, 9, and
mhm.
then a separate high school, which was 10, 11, 12.
Okay, so that's more similar to like the Japanese setup.
Yeah, definitely how we did it. And
Yeah.
yeah. It was so if it was a more rural area, it might have elementary, junior high school combined if it was kind of smaller. But I
Uh-huh.
I I definitely went from it was kindergarten to grade 6, then I went to junior high school, separate building, like separate actually lived in a small area, separate like town. And then I went to high school, which was 10, 11, 12. Yeah.
Yeah, my ninth grade year was the year that they switched it. So they switched from having middle school, junior high, high school to the middle school and junior high both became junior highs. So sixth, seventh, eighth, and then the high school went 9 to 12. So I was in the first class that ever went 4 years at the high school. And the way they did like sports was ninth and 10th was JV, 11th and 12th was varsity.
Okay.
And so because before I think it was I don't know. I think some places like have senior ball,
Hmm.
and then like even freshmen could play senior ball if they had the skills. But anyway, we're going off on crazy tangents.
Yeah,
It's
but
all good.
it's all good. It's all good. Hey, Brian, thank you for coming on back on the podcast. It was great to have, and I have to admit, folks, you're listening. You're like, this wasn't quite as structured as other podcast episodes I've listened to. That's okay. That's what I wanted. I literally just wanted to come on and chat with Brian about like being a parent of kids in Japan and having that experience. Because um, for those of you who are out there who are like really serious about Japan and you're like, I want to live in Japan. Well, one of the inevitabilities if you're going to live in Japan long term is, maybe getting married and having kids and having them go to school. So it happens. So
That's right.
yeah. So Brian, if people want to find you on social media, how can they do that?
So I'm at My2Yen on Twitter, and that's probably where I'm most active. You can also go to my house blog, which is japanhouseblog.tumblr.com, which I haven't updated since the house is fully completed. But anyway,
Been a few
it's
years.
it's pretty thorough from the point of planning. I mean, just thinking about building a house to actually having completed. So it's a nice little
Nice.
start to finish type of blog if you're interested in that.
So if you're interested in building a house, go to that Japan house blog.
Yeah, japanhouseblog.tumblr.net.
Nice.
No, .com, I guess. Tumblr.com. Yeah.
Okay, we'll finalize that URL and post it in the show notes at justjapanstuff.com. So basically, if you want to connect with Brian, go to Twitter. If you're not on Twitter, what are you doing, guys? Come on. At my 2 yen, my 2 cents, my 2 yen. Come on, guys.
Yeah.
All right, guys.
Give it up.
Brian, thank you so much for returning to the Just Japan podcast.
Absolutely, man. Anytime.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank Brian for taking the time to stop by the podcast again. It was a really awesome, wonderful discussion with him, just about raising families in Japan, from the kind of foreigner perspective and about education. Of course, you can go and find him over on Twitter at my2yen on Twitter. There'll be a link in the show notes at justjapanstuff.com. Yeah, guys, so that's it for another episode of the podcast. Of course, you can find us on all major podcatchers. We're on Libsyn, we're on iHeartRadio, we're on SoundCloud and iTunes and all of that stuff. Go leave a review over on iTunes or Apple Podcasts. That helps a lot. Please say nice things about this podcast. I would really appreciate it. And of course, you can follow me on Twitter at jlandkev for all my Japan content. We got a Facebook page, folks. It's a great Facebook page. It's chocked full of Japan news. That's over at facebook.com/justjapanstuff. Go to all those places. And of course, like I mentioned earlier on in the episode, go check out my new project over at makingbetterteachers.com. All right, guys. Well, that does it for another episode, another week of the Just Japan podcast. Everything you want to know about Japan. My name is Kevin O'Shea. I'm a Canadian. I lived in Japan for a heck of a long time. My wife's Japanese. My kids are Japanese, and we've got a strong connection. One more thing I need to announce. Almost slipped my mind. This June, near the end of June, I have to set a specific date. June 2018. There will be another Just Japan podcast meetup. There will be a meetup in Kobe, Japan. I'll be there for a couple of weeks. So I'm probably going to go with the Harbor Tavern. That's where we've had the last two, and things always went really good there. That's in Sanomiya. So I will make a Facebook event page for that soon, and I'll share it with you guys. So kind of pencil that vaguely on your calendars if you're going to be visiting Japan during that time, or you're in Japan in the Kansai area or elsewhere. The end of June this year, 2018, there will be another Just Japan podcast meetup, and I can't wait to see you guys there. So that does it for this week. Wherever you are in the world, I hope you're happy, hope you're healthy, and I'll be talking to you real soon.
What?